If you value this content and want to support us in continuing this work, please go over to our website and make a contribution. Also, consider rating us on iTunes so that we can keep growing this community and network towards Earth regeneration. And if you're a musician and would like your music played on the show, go to our website and upload your work. We're excited to take a listen.
The silence is broken by somebody crying, trying to be heard, never a word. Always the attitude, sort out your own, always alone, wishing for something the world is denying. Out in the wilderness somebody's crying. Somebody wishing for something to happen, wishing to tell, wishing to help. Someone was listening, someone who cared, never despaired. Someone to lean on and someone to trust, who needs your assistance and finds your disgust.
Hello and welcome to For the Wild podcast. I'm Ayana Young. Today we are speaking with Peter Wohlleben. Peter spent over 20 years working in the Forestry Commission in Germany before leaving to put his ideas of ecology into practice. He now runs an environmentally friendly woodland in the Eifel Mountains in Germany, where he is working for the return of primeval forest. He also runs a nature academy, where he leads guided tours and seminars. He is the author of numerous books about nature, including The Hidden Life of Trees, a New York Times bestseller, and The Inner Life of Animals. Peter will also be speaking at the Geography of Hope conference this March in Point Reyes, California. The theme this year is Finding Resilience in Nature in Perilous Times. Well, welcome to the show, Peter. I'm so excited to speak to you now and also meet you in Point Reyes in March.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ayana. I'm really proud to be part of your show.
This topic, the hidden life of trees and forestry and your work, is so dear to my heart, as I myself am a forest dweller and a restoration ecologist and spend the majority of my life amongst these incredible beings. And reading your book was so enlightening to learn about all of these complexities that are so often left out of the dominant narrative of forest. I mean, certain things come to mind, like how from a tree dying shortly after their life partner passes, to trees nursing their sick neighbors, or trees ultrasonically scream when they're thirsty, or warn one another of predatory insects. It's so enlivening to be reminded that there are beings on this earth who still know how to look after one another and have done so even through so many planetary shifts. These lessons of the forest are the lessons I think humanity needs to know most right now. Peter, you've studied forestry and worked for a long time as a commercial forester before you began stewarding your woodland in the way you do today. And I'm wondering, what are some crucial moments for you during your commercial forestry career that caused you to shift your life and your perspective in this way?
First thing was when we felled an old dead beech tree, which I thought was just worth firewood. And after I felled, or the woodworkers have felled this old tree, and it was transported for firewood. But afterwards, I felt sorry for the insects, for the fungi which were living in this old tree. And then I began to think about what I'm really doing to this forest. Or shortly after that, I felt a sick tree, and in March, and when they felled the tree afterwards, there were a mess of water running out of the stump, as if the tree were bleeding. And yeah, and I thought, what are you doing to this wonderful ecosystem? And then I began to think about what I really wanted to be as a little child. As a little child, I wanted to be someone who protect nature. And when I was, let's say, 12 or 13, I realized that you can study something like this. Yeah, when I became 19, I heard about forestry, and I thought, a forester is something like a tree keeper, and that should match to my dreams about nature. And after leaving university and beginning to work in a sense like I described it a little earlier, then I realized, no, a forester is not a tree keeper. A forester is a tree butcher and is a timber producer. It's okay, but it's not what I've dreamed of. And so I'm really happy that the book on trees was so successful, because with the money we earned, we founded a nature academy. And in this academy, I can now work as someone I dreamed of when I was 6 years old.
I loved how you explained that you wanted to be a tree protector, but that a forester was a tree butcher. And I had never thought of it in those words. Immediately, the moment you spoke of your academy, I wanted to be there with you and learning. And I would just love to hear about your beloved woodland.
Our ecosystem is in a very bad mood, because we have here in Germany, we don't have any single square meter of primeval forest left. Our primeval forest has been beech forest. A beech forest form a very stable ecosystem because they can control their own temperature, create their own microclimate, and are very stable over thousands of years. But in the last centuries in Germany, most forests, real forests, have been gone. Now we have plantations, spruce plantations, pine plantations, oak plantations, and so on. And the people are used to it and say, that are forests. And when we get visitors from other countries, they say, no, you don't have forests, you have plantations. We have no real primeval forest, because all forests have been managed. But from old beech forests, even managed forests, we just have 3 per mill left of the whole woodland. So we have damaged our forests here in Germany, and we are really good in giving advice to Brazil or Indonesia to protect the rainforest there. But I think it's perhaps 5 to noon here in Germany for the forest, and it's a lot of work to do. But the real forests we should have here, those beech forests, where are just a few remnants here in our area, they are so wonderful. Because when you come in those old forests, it's like going in a cathedral let's say silver gray stems, which are very tall. The trees can become as old as 500 years. That's not that old then that your redwoods can become. But 500 years, we don't have any forest where we have trees of that age here in Germany left. So I really try hard to work on restore such forests and undisturbed beech forests. You can observe all those wonderful things, that the trees are caring for each other, that they are caring for their offspring, that they are caring for old stumps, that they work together. And the less you touch such a forest, the healthier it is. And that brought my thought to the point that we should use just a little wood, a little timber, just as much as we really need. And in most cases, when you think about paper, when you print your emails, for example, in most cases, it's not necessary. And in some cases, it's okay to use wood, and for example, for furniture or good books. But many cases, we wouldn't need that big amount of timber. And that's a complex task for us to do. But when you see those untouched old beech tree forests, then everyone knows instantly that's worth it.
So the native forests of your region are primarily deciduous, yet the commercially managed ones are planted with non-native conifers. How would you say they differ in terms of health, biodiversity, and what happens when one of the coniferous plantations is left alone and succession is left to unfold naturally?
I think nature don't has any problems with restoring the ecosystem. The problem is the farther you are away from the natural state, the stronger will be the reaction of nature to bring back the old system. For example, when you have such a conifer, let's say spruce plantation, in Germany, those plantations are very endangered by storms and insects. 57% of the timber is gained through catastrophes, through storm falls or insect attacks. So it's not really good to work or to calculate with such plantations. So it's really not a good business, even if you won't think about the ecologic destructions you make with such a management. But we have every winter we have storms here in Germany, and every time you hear about fallen trees and streets which are not able to pass because of such trees which were fallen, such streets. So we have problems, and our animals which are living in woodlands, they couldn't even live in such plantations. For example, little mites or insects or birds which are used to live in broadleaf trees like beech or oak. They are not able to feed on needles of spruce or pine. So you find in such artificial ecosystems, you find other animals, which in our case, spruce and pine are trees from the taiga, from the northern woodland in Sweden, Norway, Russia. And you find in such plantations birds or insects like special ants, which live in such taiga forests. And so we have here in Germany, in many cases, an artificial taiga, and which has nothing to do with our wonderful beech tree forest. I'm not against conifers where they belong. When we look at northern Sweden, we have wonderful primeval forests with spruce and pine and other species. But here in Germany, we used to have beech trees, oaks, acer and other trees, and they are in many cases almost gone.
I want to read a quote from your book that just fascinated me regarding this topic, and it was, quote, "However, reforestation programs introduce spruce and pines to areas where they are not native, and the newcomers experience substantial problems in their new habitats. Usually they are brought to low elevations that are too warm and dry for conifers to thrive. As a result, the area is dustier, they are easier prey for bark beetles. At this point, frantic scent males begin to swirl around in the canopy. The trees are screaming for help and activating their arsenal of chemical defenses. You absorb all of this with every breath of the forest you take into your lungs. Consider this. Threatened forests are inherently unstable, and therefore they are not appropriate places for human beings to live. There is a scientific observation that speaks to this. The blood pressure of forest visitors rises when they are under conifers, whereas it calms down and falls in stands of oaks." And, you go on to explain just this relationship with the forest, with humans in the forest, when we go into these non-native forests that are not natural and they're not meant to be like that. The ecosystem, the weather does not support that type of forest community. And that was so incredible to think about when I've been into tree plantations versus in old growth forest, and how I do feel the difference. And I actually really understood that while reading your book, the scientific backing of that, and then your take on it. I just wanted to bring that into this conversation because I think it's so fascinating to understand all the dynamics that are left out of the story, the dominant story at least, when we learn about what happens with reforestation in this way.
That's a really good topic because it shows that we are still part of the forests, and many people living in cities think, perhaps we have lost connection with nature. But you can't lose connection with nature because it's in your body, in your genes. When you look at evolution, then we know that at minimum since 1 million years, mankind is making fire. And for making fire, you need timber, and for timber, you need trees, you need a forest. So, for example, brain development. For brain development, we need cooked food. We need fire. We need fire, so our brain is a result of forest, tree energy, let's say it like this. So we are strongly connected since 1 million years with forests, and it's no wonder that our body, our instincts react on good or bad forests, good or bad ecosystems, good or bad places to settle. And therefore, what you describe when you feel joy or happiness while walking through a native forest, or vice versa when you're walking through a plantation, that these feelings are missing. That's exactly what your body and your instincts are saying. And some people, for example, when they enter our old beech tree forest, I've heard that several times. They said to me, "Don't call me crazy, but it's like feeling. It feels like coming home." And that's exactly the point. A good, stable forest, and that can be a redwood forest at the west coast of North America, that can be a beech tree forest at the east coast of North America or in Europe, that can be a spruce forest in northern Scandinavia. In those forests, you have good feelings, you have lower blood pressure, your whole body and your mind are in a good mood. And when you go through a plantation, your body feels instinctively that this is a catastrophe to nature, and what your body, how your body reacts, that's exactly the reaction of the whole nature. And it's the nature is trying to bring it in a better balance, and that means at first that those plantations will be eaten by bark beetles, by other insects, by fungi which destroy trees. And in the first decades, maybe such forests or plantations look very ugly, but afterwards, in just one tree generation, and that may be 500 years, this forest will change in a real forest.
I'd like to talk about the social relationships of trees, and through your book and through others' work and scientific findings, it's showing that not only do trees not act selfishly or purely competitively, but they're also very social. They're social beings. And in The Hidden Life of Trees, you detail kinship that seems to extend beyond single species. Susan Simard from the University of British Columbia, whom you reference, noticed that Douglas firs suffered when their paper birch neighbors were removed. The shaded Doug firs were receiving a great deal of carbon from birch through the mycorrhizae, and that this relationship flipped when the season changed and the birch shed their leaves. I would love if you could speak about the social nature of trees and resource sharing. Perhaps you could give us an example of unique tree relationships from your woodland.
Perhaps in general, real forest trees, not all trees are real forest trees. Some trees like to live on their own because there are trees of the savanna, of grasslands, and there are usually no neighboring trees. So there are some trees like willows or some birch tree species or apple trees, cherry trees, which used to live on their own. But in general, in the most woodlands, with the tree species like Douglas fir, or sequoia, or in our region, beech trees, oaks, acer, and so on, they used to live in family bands. And there's a very good reason for that. A single tree knows instinctively, I'm not a forest. And just as a forest, you can cool down together on a hot summer day. For example, trees are sweating together. Big beech tree is consuming as much as 500 liters of water per day. And that means that the air gets very humid, much cooler. We have here discoveries from the University of Aachen. They found out that the temperature difference from managed beech tree forest to unmanaged beech tree forest is 3 degrees Celsius in summertime, and to conifer plantations, much more. So the trees can cool down together, can create their own climate. And when we think about climate change, what climate change does to ecosystems, then I would say the damage would be not that big when we wouldn't manage that intensive forest. Because every tree you cut, you fell, cause a damage because you have a gap in the canopy, there comes sunlight in, the air gets warmer, and the air gets drier, and that's stress for the trees. So they try to close that gap, but perhaps the next time the forester comes again and the next tree will be felled, and not just one, but thousands. So the whole ecosystem is warming up. And when we have on top the human-made climate change, then we will see many forests die, as we see them now dying in North America, for example, the lodgepole pine forests, which are attacked by the bark beetles. I think that's a mixture of many problems, but most of them human-made. So trees are used to climate change because trees can become very old. When we look at Europe, for example, the last 1,000 years, we have had very warm times. We have had the Little Ice Age in the Middle Ages. I think the last very cold period was in the 1800s. So a tree which can become 500 or even 1,000 years old has to stand climate changes, but it's only able to stand those changes together as a community. And it's not only the climate, but it's also when a tree gets weak, for example, or gets sick, it gets support from the other trees. We have here in my forest a tree which was really very heavily damaged, and everyone would have said that tree is not able to survive. And but it's like a wonder because this tree has got support from the surrounding trees through the roots, through the fungi network, with sugar solutions and other nutritions. This tree became strong again, and perhaps, and that's just a guess, the next time when one of the neighboring trees gets weak, he can support this tree. So they together they build a very stable ecosystem, or you can say they build a stable family band, because trees they know exactly who is standing beside it. For example, with the root tips, they can detect, this is an oak. I want to support an oak. I will support other beech trees. So they connect just with beech trees, or even when it gets to the own seedlings, they can detect whether a seedling is their own or not. And with their own seedlings, they will connect stronger. They get more support. So yeah, you can even say mother trees are caring for their children. Now, some people say, that's much too much human terms, and trees are much more different than using words like this. But I think nature has some principles which are working really good. And that is for having a good social system. When you support each other, all together can become much older. And that system works on trees, that works on antelopes, that works on humans. And we see it nowadays, and that's perhaps a little bit ironic when we see we had a good system, a worldwide system, a little bit breaking apart. And I hope we see those political situations. If trees could talk to us, they would say, stand together, don't make that nonsense.
There's a fascinating section in your book titled Tree School that tells of trees' ability to learn from their elders as well as from their own mistakes and experience. And you go on to explain how when trees are planted in isolation, either in a park or in a land foreign to them, they don't fare as well, and they often suffer because they lack the community guidance in their youth. I would just love if you wanted to elaborate a bit on this, and what lessons are these isolated trees deprived of when they grow up bereft of family and their communities?
All trees like to grow fast, and eat as much as they can. And trees are creating food by photosynthesis with their leaves, and therefore they need to have as much light as possible. And that's exactly the point. Everyone who grows fast in young years won't become very old. That's a biological principle which you can find in many species. So trees are interested in becoming very old because it takes a lot of time to grow up and to become a tall tree, become the tallest tree, to be on top of the forest, and then to reproduce. That takes hundreds of years. And so it's very important to become as old as possible to use this advantage as long as possible. And therefore, you need a very slow youth growth. And that means that the mother trees bring a deep shadow on the little trees. Just 3% of the sunlight comes down to the little ones, and that's not enough to live. And therefore, the mother trees connect with the little ones over the roots and pump sugar solution to the little ones. You may even say they suckle their children over hundreds of years. We have a 100-year-old beech tree, little beech tree. It's just 1 meter in height and as thick as my little finger. So this tree has to wait perhaps 1 or 2 centuries more to become an old tree, to be allowed to become an old tree. And that's in cities totally different. When you have a tree which is planted near a street, then this tree gets the full sunlight. It's like a street kid. This tree is allowed to do whatever it wants. So it feeds as much as possible sugar, because it can make with all the crown, with all the canopy, photosynthesis in the full sunlight. It grows very fast, and we love trees which are fast growing because we are impatient. We are a short-living creature compared to trees. So we want to see efforts, results during our lifetime. For example, when you plant a tree in your garden, you won't wait for 20 or 30 years to see the tree growing very slow, but you want to harvest apples or cherries, and you want to have something like a garden furniture which gives shadow. So we plant big trees, we plant trees which grow very fast. These trees altogether can become very old. That's not so important for us, and it's okay to do so, because our garden, that's our home range, and there are we first. But just to explain, trees in cities or in gardens, they won't become older in general than 200 or 300 years. There are perhaps some exceptions, but most trees won't become much older. And we all think, wow, what an old tree. And in reality, that's a young tree, a young dying. Another example, trees have similar behaviors like we have. For example, they need to sleep at night. And the science in this point is just at the beginning. There's a team of Finnish and Austrian researchers which they found out that trees let hang their branches at nighttime, just a little bit. And with sunlight, they something like stand up. What for, they don't know, because that's a typical phenomena in science. You have answered one question and then you have 10 new one. But they know that trees have to sleep. And when in the streets you have street lights near a tree and the light is burning the whole night, then the tree is not able to sleep. And those trees will die earlier.
I'd love to also ask you, How has your understanding of forest as familial communities shaped the way you steward and manage your woodland compared to the ways in which commercial forest management is incompatible with the social structure of forest trees?
First, we have to realize you can't manage a forest without disturbing or damaging it. We always try to live in a good balance with nature and in harmony. And we like to have something like a certificate which is saying, okay, you're allowed to do so because you don't do any harm to anyone. That's not possible. Every living being does harm to everyone else because it needs space, which another could take, and so on. So for me, the main question is, how could we manage a forest without harming it too much, or with harming it lesser than we do it now? And the first thing is when we realize that we can't manage a forest. Manage a forest means cutting trees. We can't cut trees and protect them. The tree is dead afterwards. So the question is, we should have protected areas where trees can live their life and can live in family bands undisturbed for centuries. That's very important for me, to have big enough areas where trees are allowed to do so. And then the rest of the forest, we should manage as close as possible to nature. And that means that we should use the tree species of the special area where the woodlands are, which we manage. In your case, that would be Douglas fir, hemlock, and other species. And in our case here, it would be beech and oak and acer and ash and so on. And the second is the trees should live as long as possible. In Germany, the average age of trees is 77. That's nothing. That are not real trees. That are tree babies. That's the average age of trees in Germany. So I think they should grow older, and they should become older. We should live them, although they live in managed forests in family bands. And when we harvest, then not with big machines. We have all over the world the same technique with big harvesters that are machines which cut trees and cut them into pieces, cut off the branches and make them ready for transport. And those machines are very heavy. They weigh up to 50 tons. And they compress the soil, and then we don't have any oxygen left in the soil. We don't have the capacity of water storage. It goes from 100% down to 5%. And it's very important for the trees to have this stored water in the ground, because on hot summer days, when there's no rain and a big tree needs 500 liters per day, then those 500 liters have to come from anywhere. And when the soil is dry, then the tree will become weak and sick and perhaps die someday. So and the damages when you drive with a big machine in such a forest, this damage, according to scientists, will be restored perhaps after the next ice age, or recover after the next ice age. So there's nothing you can do to restore such soils. So it's a pity and a shame to go with such big machines over the woodland floor, over the soil. And so we are using horses. The work with horses in the woods. That's a tradition made since 6,000 years, and it's still working today. And it's when you calculate it incomplete, when you calculate the damage you're doing to the soil, when you calculate the machine cost and so on, then you find out that the horses are cheaper. They are cheaper, and many foresters say, we don't have that many horses to do all the work. No, there's no demand, and therefore we don't have many horses. And the most horse keepers of those, we say something like tracking horses, those horse keepers, there are just a few, and they say we would love to have more jobs for doing such work, but there's no demand. And that's what we are doing and what we are practicing in our academy. We're not making guided tours and things like that, but also seminars for woodland owners, which like to change the practice of management.
I myself have been really struggling with the idea of machinery use, even in restoration work, say for creating swales or to bring coarse woody debris into streams for salmon habitat complexity. And I've actually operated machines myself this last summer while building the native species nursery, and I see the soil compaction and destruction that is inevitable with machines. And it did feel almost spiritually disrespectful when compared to techniques that use slow human animal strength. And so I wonder, do machines have some use in reforestation or restoration work? But hearing you speak, it reminds me that it's not worth it, even though there is this intense feeling of urgency, and the machine has been invented and it's been conditioned in our mind that machines are fast and efficient. And now with so much damage happening on Earth, this feeling of we must use machines because they will be faster and we can't possibly protect and conserve and restore all of this land in a timely way without the use of machines. So I definitely feel that struggle in myself. And this other topic that I've been really questioning right now is forest thinning. There's also this dogmatic notion of thinning in forest management as there is with machines in restoration. And it's believed and a common practice that cutting intermittent trees opens up light in the canopy, letting the remaining trees grow more vigorously and with a more straight structure, which is then, of course, more profitable. Yet this idea is rooted in an understanding of trees as individualistically competitive. And you thoroughly dispel this in your book, describing how thinning can actually do more harm than good. And you've also now explained to us how fast-growing trees don't actually live the longest, and they may not even be the healthiest. So would you tell us how you've learned about the effects of thinning on forest communities? And how does this widely accepted notion lack an appreciation for the cooperative and communal reality of forest as we're dealing with so many plantation forests, so many second, third growth forests that are extremely overgrown in so many senses, and also a fire danger? What do we do in place of commercial thinning? Is there another option that you see that's more beneficial in the long run for a healthy ecosystem?
To begin with your last question about the fire. I think the farther the ecosystem is away from nature, the higher is the fire danger. You can see that in Portugal, for example, they used to have oak forest in former times, and nowadays they have many conifer forest and also eucalyptus forest. And now they are the most endangered country in Europe concerning fire, wood fire, because of those plantations. Because it's like gasoline, the leaves on the ground. So when someone lights a cigarette and throw it away, the whole forest is burning instantly. And whereas the old oak forest was not able to burn, you can try to light a beech or oak tree, a living tree. It's not possible. So I think forestry is causing many problems where foresters say, that's a problem of nature, that's a problem of climate change. There are problems of nature, there are problems of climate change, but they wouldn't be that strong without forestry. So to come to another topic you mentioned, that trees, we will say or told that trees compete in a forest, and that when we thin a forest, there's more space for the other trees to grow faster. Yes, those trees are growing faster, but they shouldn't, because fast-growing trees won't become very old. That's perhaps you can compare it to the industrial animal keeping. Pigs are forced in those industries, you can say, to grow in 5 or 6 months, ready for slaughter. And when you put such pigs out of the stables and bring them to an animal keeper, we have here some people who care for pigs like that, they won't become much older than 1 year, because their body is exhausted from fast growing, their lungs, their heart, and whatsoever. It's so so stressed from this fast-growing process that those pigs are not able to live very much longer. So you have the same problems with such plantations. At first, when you plant a tree, the roots are damaged. It's like opening your body and put your gut out, for example. That the roots are not used to see sunlight. And you take them out of the tree nursery, put them in a new soil, you compress the soil, then you squeeze the roots, perhaps you even cut the roots. And when you know that at the root tips there are brain-like structures with brain-like processes going on. And when you cut those tips, the roots will restore, but not in the same quality. So the roots are damaged. The trees are not rooting very deep anymore after planting. That's a general thing. And afterwards, they grow very fast, too fast. They get exhausted, so they are not able to defend very good against bark beetle attacks. And they are not very socialized. But we can see that, for example, that old stumps, in most cases, they don't get support from surrounding trees when this old stump is in a plantation, because planted trees won't connect that good and that quality like trees in a natural forest. So plantations are full of weak but good-looking trees, good-looking to the industry, and we have learned that when the forest industry say, hey, that's a good tree, but in reality it's a weak tree. It's a tree which is much too tall for this age, and this tree is endangered by fire, it's endangered by insects, it's endangered by hot summer days. And when then such a big plantation becomes problems, then most people say, that's nature. But I say, no, that's forestry.
So what can we do as restorationists, as holistic managers, to deal with the problems left in the wake of these plantation forests?
First, it's necessary to see what is the main problem. The main problem is that we don't want to lose time. But the question is it really important for nature to make this restoration in 1 decade or 2 decades? Nature has time, we don't have time. We want to see results, that's on one hand. On the other hand, we are destroying nature in a speed that it's necessary to hurry up a little bit, and I can understand that. And it's also good for us to see results because it's a good motivation. And so I would make a combination. I would perhaps plant here and there trees, and that's more for us than for nature, because we can see a little forest, we can see results, and it's good to see results. On the other hand, it's letting nature doing the job. For example, when we have here our spruce plantations and we want to change them, we say, okay, the fastest thing would be to plant little beech trees. But as I said, when you plant a tree, you damage it. So it become a big tree, but not a healthy tree, and we want to have healthy trees. So we try to work with the nature, and that means that we make big boxes, wooden boxes in the forest. And therein we put in acorns and beech nuts, and then the birds like scrub jays, that's a raven bird, it comes and is picking up those seeds and storing them around in the forest floor as a winter depot. So, and this scrub jay always wants to be on the safe side. It just needs, let's say, 1,500 beech nuts, but it's storing around about 10,000. I want to be on the safe side. So that means that 8,500 beech nuts are able to become seedlings in the next spring. And seedlings with an intact root system, they were seeded in a natural way, and that with just little cost. For example, when we plant a beech tree that costs €1, or let's say $1, and we need for a square kilometer, let's say, I think 2 million seedlings to have something like, okay, forest. It's not a very good forest, but it's okay with 2 million plants. So that costs $2 million. And when we do the birds the job, cost for a square kilometer, perhaps, let's say $200. Just $200. And the bird is happy to do the job because it gets enough to feed. So That's exactly the method I would recommend. Let nature do the job, and if we want to try to show the direction or to speed up a little bit this process, then it's good to offer these birds seeds of the trees we want to restore, or if it are seeds which are not eaten by birds or other animals which bring it out in the nature, then you can bring yourself the seeds in the forest and bring them aground. And the second best is to plant here and there a group of trees, but it would always be best to plant groups and not single trees, to have little hotspots where the development is a little bit faster, and that is an advantage even for the seeded trees, because then we have shadow in the forest, we have less wind in the forest. That means that we have a more humid microclimate. So that's perhaps the best thing would be a combination. And then all are happy, the nature and the people who are so good in bringing back nature.
That was so helpful to hear, especially as I'm setting up this native species nursery and have put so much thought and care into strategy behind how to reforest damaged landscapes, whether that's been clear-cut land or burned areas. And a lot of times, especially in California, Oregon, and Washington, with all of the land use change, areas where there used to be oak savannas have been taken over by Doug fir, which actually is invasive in those areas. And then places that used to have redwood have been taken over by hardwoods such as oaks and madrones, because the redwood isn't able to spread as quickly as these other hardwoods in the sun. And so there's this complexity to reforestation. And it's not just as simple as walking out and planting a million trees, which in and of itself is not simple. So to hear your thoughts with the birds and the biodiversity, which I'm very committed to when replanting, it's not just planting the one conifer that is what's been conditioned as the valuable tree, but how do we replant biodiversity along with understanding that these trees need shade and they need each other and they need the whole community, and also being aware of the compaction to the soil. It's just a lot to take into consideration. And I think also with you bringing up this deep understanding of the time frame of us humans, and then the time frame of nature and the forest, and how different those are, and how we need to take that into consideration when we're thinking about how to be the best earth stewards we can be. And the other thing that came up for me as you were speaking was the thinning, and even how one may think that thinning is beneficial for forest health and fire safety. It not always is that case, and we really need to think about this more fully. Not just thinning, but then selective logging, and how so much of the time when trees are selectively logged, the trees that are chosen are consistently the, quote, desirable timber trees with a certain structure that's straight. And I think about, well, are we not removing certain trees, and usually the oldest trees, from the gene pool? If we were to selectively log, what do you feel is the best way to go about that when selecting certain trees, and how to basically honorably harvest trees if that were the case for communities that still rely on logging for their economy?
Yeah, I would work without big machines. That means in every case where the machines are not able to drive on roads, on dirt roads, I would choose to do it with horses. And I would like to fell, if a tree should be felled, with woodworkers. That's good for jobs, and that's good for the forest, and that's also good for the money, because you earn much more money with a healthy forest. And When it gets to the thinning, to be honest, it wouldn't make any sense if we would choose trees we couldn't use for planks, for example, just choosing the tree because it's less worth for the forest. And we don't know how much a tree is worth for a forest. So it's always okay when you manage a forest to take out what we really need. And therefore, because our needs are sometimes a contradiction to the needs of the forest, we need those protected areas, and in between some little areas, perhaps just 50 yards or so in diameter. And in this area, the trees are allowed to grow and to keep their complete genes. Because if you thin a forest in the first years, the foresters take out the trees which are not straight and have too thick branches or other things. And that means that they are bringing them, they are breeding the trees to a type which is not really wild. It's a domesticated tree species afterwards with just a few wild genes left, and there are some very important things missing. For example, a wild tree is able to withstand storms much better than a domesticated tree because it's able to move back and forth without breaking. So without breaking, and a domesticated tree with good stem for forest industry, which is very straight and where the fibers inside are straight too, without drilling. Those trees break much easily in heavy storms. So it's always good to have those little spots inside with wild trees with complete genes. And over the pollination in spring, they mix their genes with the genes of the managed forest, and so you keep the wild gene reservoir of those forests. That's the method we are doing, and so according to the moment, according to our knowledge up to date, we say that's the best compromise for managing forests, because we are also important as humans, and it's okay to take out what we need out of the forest, but it's perhaps a better balance than it is now. And what's very important for me to say, when we protect nature, for example, what's wonderful, I love what you told about the restoration of forest and former woodlands, what you're doing. That's really a great job. And what we should know is that over long time frame, the next ice age will come, will destroy that wonderful forest, a new forest will be built, and that's coming and going like it was ever in the whole time the Earth is our universe. But nowadays we have the problems, and that are our problems. And when you protect the forest, or when you restore a forest or plant new trees, then you protect the people, the human species, because nature protection is in first the protection of ourselves, and I think it's very important to be aware of that. So there is no distance. Here is nature, and there are we. And we are working against each other. No, we are one system, and when we protect our system, we protect ourselves.
I would love to now turn the conversation towards forest and climate, and how this relationship is much more expansive than the sequestration of carbon. Forests are the reason precipitation even reaches the landlocked interior of continents through the cyclical creation of clouds, as water is intercepted, evaporated, and transpires as it moves inland. So could you share with us what you know of this phenomenon and help us understand why coastal forests are essential in this life-giving system?
Yeah, that's a research, I think, from Russian scientists, which found in the Amazon region more and more heavy droughts in the last decades. And they asked why. Is it because of the climate change? I think the climate change is nowadays the easiest explanation, but in this special case, they found out that forests are working like a water pump. Within a range of, let's say, 300 or 400 miles from the coast, the clouds are losing the rain and then disappear. So after the German edition, it's 600 kilometers. I think it's around about 400 miles. After 400 miles, usually in the continents you have a desert because there are no clouds anymore. They have lost their rain in those 400 mile strip from the coast to the inland, and afterwards you have a desert. But if you have a forest in this region, then the rain falls in, the humidity is gassing out, is forming new clouds, the clouds are shifting deeper into the country and raining again, and when there's another forest going deeper into the continents and there's another forest and so on, so the water is handed deeper and deeper into the continents by trees. And the Russian researchers found out that even 2,000 miles away from the coast you have the same humidity, the same rainfall amount like at the coast. But when you destroy the coastal forest, you destroy the main water pump, which is responsible for the first part of the chain. When you destroy it, then it's logical that the rest behind gets drier and drier. And that's the reason why many regions get more deserted, gets drier, because we have destroyed so many forests, whether it is in the United States or Canada or Europe. There, when you look at time shift films where how the forest disappeared in the last 2 centuries in the Northern Hemisphere, then it's no surprise that the inner of the continents gets drier and drier. Therefore, it's very important to bring the forest back. And therefore, yeah, I can say just again, it's wonderful to hear from you that you are planting trees and are working on the restoration of woodlands.
Forests are more than habitat, more than just biodiversity. It's more than carbon sequestration. They also call in the rain. And for us here in California, and honestly all up and down the West Coast, drought is a major concern for many people. And so when we continue to log our forest and then plant with agriculture or develop suburbs, which then pump water out of these aquifers that are then not recharged by forest, we're getting ourselves into this water management issues and water scarcity. And I know this is really happening all over the globe, whether that's in China, South America. So I think this concept of forest as water pump is so deeply important as we look to the future for human survival and survival of biodiversity and our other kin. So I was also so fascinated to learn that you have initiated a living gravestone project which preserves a stretch of forest by selling burial plots with trees as living gravestones, not only as it lets the trees live out their lives fully, ensuring they won't be cut down, but also instills a sense of regeneration and earth-based ceremony into human death. And as our dominant culture has been so dissociated from death and fears and it sterilizes death, I hope to see and be a part of more initiatives such as this in my lifetime. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what projects like this can bring to communities.
It's really a lovely project for many reasons. At first, I thought, okay, I had to get an idea how to protect an old beech tree forest, which should be clear-cutted by the forest authorities. And I thought, okay, we need a rescue plan. And then there came up the idea in Switzerland that to bury the urns of people in forest. And I thought, okay, that would be a perfect idea, and we planned the project, we made the project, and afterwards I realized that's even better because it brings back the real sense that we belong to nature, that we are a part of the nature, and after dying our body will go back to nature without being a environmental problem, which many people think about nowadays because of the medicine and what you have all in your body. That's no problem when the body is burned and the urn is brought into the root system of an oak beech tree, because it's most of your remaining ash is calcium. It's not bad for the tree, and it's vice versa. And it shows that your body is going to be something new afterwards in form of timber or leaves. That shows for me even better that we are not evil to the forest. We are part of the forest with 7.6 billion people on this little globe. It's a little bit too much, but that's no problem we individually can solve. So I think it's better to live in harmony with the forest, to do the things we can do. We are not able to solve all problems. And we shouldn't think too much about this, but we should think about problems we can solve, like your restoration projects. That is, burying people in forest, have living headstones. It's much easier to people to handle with death. We see it in every case, a tragedy to lose a family member, but when you're in the forest, and it feels you see the nature, and you are aware of that your beloved family member is part of this wonderful system while living and also being dead. So the circle closes, and what your soul is doing, that's not the question in this case. But I think for many families, it's a good feeling to know that their beloved family member is resting in such a peaceful environment. And and so for us, it's a wonderful combination, because those family members buried in this forest, they protect with their urn the tree which they are buried at. So it's even able to protect forest after having died. So yeah, it sounds perhaps a little bit crazy, and most foresters, which I spoke about before making this project, say, you crazy guy, now you're a corona and not a forester anymore. And I say, okay, I love to talk with people, to help people in this very sad situation. It's for me a better job than cutting old mother trees and selling them to China, for example.
What a beautiful solution for so many of our disconnections. I really love that, and I hope that this burial forest can continue to spread throughout the world. So for our last and bonus question, I heard you speak in an interview about how recent research is uncovering that plant roots emit and respond to sound. And in reflection, you said something along the lines of, with every answer, 10 new questions arise. And there's just so much truth to that, and embracing all that we cannot make sense of, and perhaps we'll never be able to. What do you think of this sound that's coming from the roots? And what is your intuition about what is being communicated?
We know that there are a lot of things going on, and that trees have perhaps more ways to communicate than we have. Let's say it again, the main problem is that trees are so much slower than we are. The electrical signal within tree tissue is traveling as much as 1 centimeter per second. In our body, from head to feet, it needs just 2 milliseconds. That's thousands times of faster. So that's the main difficulty for us to detect and to research trees. But to come to your question, it's a new research from Australia that trees, for example, are not are just able to hear each other, but for example, to detect where water is flowing in the underground by hearing it. And they tried to, they made an experiment, and one sound came from a computer and in some tubes which were brought into the earth and in the soil, and near the other tube there was real water flowing, and the trees were able to hear the real water and bring their roots in this direction. So trees don't have ears, and some scientists in Germany say, that's not scientifically not correct. But I think when we are dealing with sound detection, and it doesn't matter if being has ears or whatsoever, but for me it's more important if it is able to hear sound waves. And trees are definitely able to hear sound waves. They are able to hear each other, and they are able to hear, for example, that's just one detection, they are able to hear water flowing in the underground, and water is very important for trees, so they are able to orientate, and that's another advantage which trees have.
Just incredible, Peter. I'm so grateful for your life's work and your relationship with the forest, and how much you have dedicated to understanding them, protecting them, and teaching others how we can be better stewards. So I thank you so much for that, and for the time you've spent with us and for the Wild podcast. And I am so looking forward to meeting you in person in March, and I have so many other questions that I can't wait to ask you when I meet you, because it is a really foundational moment for us here on Cougar Mountain, which is this land that a number of us are setting up this nursery on. So just know that you have been fundamental in our learning and the way that we move forward with our reforestation project. And we'll be in touch.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
So thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to our meeting in March, because I love to talk to people which are so hardworking on bringing back nature. It's really good to have a network, and it's really time and necessary to make it these days. Perfect. Really happy about it. Thank you.
Oh, me too.
Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Peter.
Bye.
Western cedar drifting on the wind through the mountains like a river.
All the music you heard today was by Eola, with This Is the World, Future Hymns, and How Far Am I From Canon. Our theme music is Like a River by Kate Wolf and Silence Returns by Bo. I'd like to thank our incredible podcast team, our producers, March Young and Andrew Storrs, research director Madison Mogulski, media director Molly Lee Bove, and to all the other soulmates here at For the Wild. Our podcast relies on your donations, so please head over to forthewild.world and make a contribution to help us continue keeping the show going. And while you're there, check out our new podcast study guides and let us know what you think. Thank you, and until next time.